The human in cryopod 11,791 had his eyes snap open. They flicked over to the slim grey alien staring at him in shock through the pod window. He felt the familiar post-cryo nausea as the stasis drugs left his system. The ship shuddered as another missile blast rocked the hull. Their 9,500-year mission had gone to shit. Rigel's heart raced as he peered at the human through the dusty window. This derelict vessel was a treasure trove for a young Vulcan archaeologist, but those missile impacts meant the scavengers had found them. Rigel made a choice. He tapped the blinking light, and the cryopod hissed open with a whoosh of pressurized air. The human inside stretched his muscular arms and legs, joints popping. He stood towering over Rigel. "Well, it's about damn time someone found us. How long were we out?" The human's perfect Vulcan startled Rigel. Rigel sputtered out, "You're human, a real human. We thought your species was a myth. Just stories." His scientific whirred whirred. If humans were real, then the legends of their combat prowess must be too. The human smirked. "I'm Sergeant Philip Dixon, United Nations Marine Corps. And you are?" "Rigel, a Vulcan archaeologist. But there's no time. Scavengers are firing on this ship. We must evacuate." Another missile struck and shrapnel screeched through the cargo hold. Cryopods sparked and exploded in showers of glass. Philip's face hardened. He strode to a nearby weapons locker and grabbed two massive rifles. He tossed one to a shocked Rigel. "Not without my squad. Help me get them out. Move!" Rigel realized with dawning horror and amazement that all 10,000 cryopods held human warriors. Soldiers, killers, Earth's mythical super-soldiers were very real, and waking up. They needed to get the entire squad out before the ship broke apart, or humanity's last warriors would die, frozen and forgotten. Rigel's mouth hung open in shock as he stammered out, "It's the Earth year 3245 AD. You've been asleep for 1,227 years. Philip let out a long whistle. "Damn, looks like we overslept a bit." He chuckled, but his eyes betrayed a hint of unease. "Captain Philip Dixon, United Earth Space Command. Mind helping me wake up my crew, Rigel?" Rigel hesitated, the old stories of Earth's brutal wars flashing through his mind. But his scientific curiosity won out. "Of course, Captain. Let's get started." As they moved from pod to pod, Philip spoke over his shoulder. "We were on a deep space mission exploring uncharted systems, looking for habitable planets to colonize. But we got ambushed by some hostile aliens. Had to abandon ship and go into cryo, hoping someone would find us." He paused, his jaw clenching at the memory. Rigel listened, enraptured. These were the details that history had lost, the truth behind the myths. He watched as each pod hissed open, revealing another human warrior stretching stiff muscles. The last cryopod opened, and a tall woman with fiery red hair stepped out. She nodded at Philip. "That's the last of us, Cap. What's our status?" Philip turned to Rigel, his brow furrowed. "What about it, Rigel? What's the state of the galaxy these days? We finally achieved some peace out there?" Rigel's throat suddenly felt dry. He licked his lips, trying to find the right words. How could he explain the centuries of war, the millions dead, the once great civilizations reduced to rubble? The Vulcan Confederacy was barely holding out against the Zorgon Empire's onslaught. Peace was a distant dream. He took a deep breath, meeting Philip's expectant gaze. "Captain, I'm afraid a great deal has changed in the last 1,000 years." Rigel hesitated, the weight of a millennium's worth of history bearing down on him. He forced a smile and said, "Captain Dixon, a great deal has changed since your time. It's best we continue this conversation on Vulcan, where our historians can provide a more comprehensive debriefing." Philip nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. He sensed there was more to the story, but now wasn't the time to press the issue. "Agreed. But first, we need to assess the condition of our ship and salvage any critical supplies or tech." As they made their way through the battered vessel, the human crew couldn't help but marvel at the sleek, advanced design of Rigel's ship, visible through the gaping holes in the hull. Touch screens, holographic displays, energy weapons. technology that seemed like science fiction to them. The reality of their situation began to sink in. In the armory, they found a cache of their own weapons, still functional despite the passage of time. Philip grabbed a pulse rifle, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. His crew did the same, arming themselves for whatever lay ahead. In the captain's quarters, Philip retrieved a small, heavily encrypted data drive. He slipped it into his pocket, a look of tenacity on his face. The journey to Vulcan was a blur, the human crew's minds reeling from the enormity of their situation. As they descended through the atmosphere, they couldn't help but stare in awe at the sprawling cities and towering spires that dotted the landscape. They were greeted by a delegation of Vulcan officials, their expressions a mix of wonder and apprehension. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they caught sight of the humans, living legends from a bygone era. In the grand chambers of the Vulcan High Council, Philip and his crew stood before the assembled leaders. The air was thick with tension as the council members bombarded them with questions about Earth's history, their mission, their intentions. Philip did his best to answer, but he could sense the fear and unease in the room. Something was wrong. Suddenly an alarm blared, the sound echoing off the high walls. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a fleet of menacing ships descending on the planet. "Zorgon attack forces have breached our outer defenses," a Vulcan officer shouted, his face pale. "They'll reach the capital in minutes." The council erupted into chaos, voices raised in panic. Philip stood, his voice cutting through the din. "It looks like you could use some help. My crew and I may be out of our time, but we're still soldiers." He looked to Rigel, a fierce glint in his eye. "Point us in the direction of the fight. We'll show you what humans are capable of." The Vulcan High Council didn't hesitate. They saw the steel in Philip's eyes and knew this was their best shot. In a flurry of activity, the humans were quickly fitted with sleek modern armor and given an array of advanced energy weapons. Rigel stepped forward, his hand outstretched to Philip. "Captain, I'd like to join you on the front lines. I can act as your guide and liaison with our forces." Philip clasped Rigel's hand firmly, a smile tugging at his lips. "We'd be honored to have you with us, Rigel. Let's show these Zorgons what happens when they mess with our friends." As they boarded the transport to the battle zone, Vulcan officers briefed the human crew on the Zorgons' capabilities. Their ships were fast and maneuverable, equipped with devastating plasma cannons. Their ground troops wore exoskeletons that enhanced their strength and speed, making them formidable in close combat. Philip listened intently, his mind already racing with strategies. "We'll need to hit them hard and fast, disrupt their command structure. If we can take out their leaders, the rest will fall into disarray." The transport shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, the sounds of battle growing louder. As the ramp lowered, Philip turned to his crew, his voice steady and strong. "Remember your training, watch each other's backs, and never give up. We've faced worse odds before and come out on top. This is what we were born to do." With a roar, the humans charged into the fray, their weapons blazing. The Zorgons, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of these unknown warriors, faltered. Philip led the charge, his pulse rifle spitting out bolts of searing energy that tore through Zorgon armor like paper. Rigel fought alongside him, his own weapon flashing. He marveled at the humans' courage and skill, their fluid movements and lightning-fast reflexes. They seemed to anticipate the Zorgons' every move, countering with devastating precision. At the heart of the Zorgon lines, a massive command post loomed, its walls filled with weapons emplacements. Philip signaled to his crew, and they moved as one, dodging and weaving through the hail of enemy fire. They breached the outer defenses, fighting their way into the command center. Philip engaged the Zorgon commander in hand-to-hand combat, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. The human's strength and speed were unmatched, and soon the commander lay dead at his feet. With their leadership in chaos, the Zorgon forces began to crumble. The Vulcans, emboldened by the humans' example, surged forward, their weapons singing. The tide of battle had turned. As the last of the Zorgons fled, a cheer went up from the Vulcan ranks. Philip and his crew stood tall, their armor scorched and battered, but their spirits unbroken. Rigel clapped Philip on the shoulder, his face alight with admiration. "You were incredible out there, Captain. The stories of human bravery were no exaggeration." Philip grinned, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "We couldn't have done it without you and your people, Rigel. This is your victory as much as ours." As the Vulcans celebrated, Rigel pulled Philip aside, his expression suddenly grave. "Captain, there's something you need to know. We've intercepted Zorgon communications that suggest they were not acting alone. They were being supplied and supported by a group called the Phantasm Syndicate." Philip frowned, the name stirring something in his memory. The Phantasm Syndicate. I feel like I've heard that name before, a long time ago. Rigel nodded, his eyes troubled. "There are whispers, ancient legends that speak of a shadowy organization that has existed for centuries, pulling the strings of galactic events from behind the scenes. And if the rumors are true, they have ties to Earth's past, to the very origins of your mission." Philip's grip tightened on his rifle, a sense of unease settling in his gut. It seemed that their battle was far from finished, and the secrets of their past were about to come back to haunt them. Philip's brow furrowed as he turned to Rigel, the weight of the revelation heavy on his shoulders. "This Phantasm Syndicate, what do you know about them? How deep does this rabbit hole go?" Rigel leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "The Syndicate is an enigma, Captain. They've been whispered about for centuries, always lurking in the shadows. Some say they've orchestrated the rise and fall of empires, manipulating events to suit their own agenda." Philip's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information. "And you think they're behind the Zorgon attack?" Rigel nodded grimly. "It's a distinct possibility. The Zorgons have always been aggressive, but this level of coordination and strategic planning is unprecedented. It suggests they had help, guidance from a higher power." Philip's eyebrows furrowed, a fire burning in his eyes. "Then we need to find out more. We can't let this syndicate continue to operate unchecked." He turned to his crew, his voice ringing with authority. "Assemble a team, our best and brightest. We're going to infiltrate a Phantasm Syndicate base and get to the bottom of this." The humans and Vulcans worked quickly, gathering intelligence and formulating a plan. They identified a suspected Syndicate outpost on a remote moon, heavily guarded and shrouded in secrecy. As they approached the base, Philip felt a sense of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. Something about this felt familiar, like a distant memory tugging at the edges of his consciousness. They breached the outer defenses, fighting their way into the heart of the facility. The Syndicate agents were well-trained and heavily armed, but they were no match for the combined skills of the humans and Vulcans. As they delved deeper into the base, they discovered a trove of ancient records and encrypted files. Rigel worked furiously to decipher them, his eyes widening with each new revelation. "Captain, you need to see this," he said, his voice trembling. "The Phantasm Syndicate, it was founded by humans, rogue members of your own species, who disagreed with the United Earth Space Command's mission of peace and exploration." Philip stared at the screens, his mind turning. "What are you saying, Rigel?" Rigel swallowed hard, his fingers flying over the controls. These humans, they believed that the only way to ensure humanity's survival was through conquest, domination. They broke away from the main fleet, disappeared into the depths of space, and over the centuries they've built this empire of shadows pulling the strings of galactic events. Philip's hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles turning white. The betrayal cut deep, the knowledge that members of his own species had been working against everything he believed in. "We have to stop them," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We have to put an end to this syndicate once and for all." But as they made their plans, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. The base shuddered as explosions rocked the walls, the sound of weapons fire echoing through the corridors. "We've got company," one of the humans shouted, readying his weapon. "Syndicate reinforcements closing fast." Philip and his team fought tooth and nail, holding off waves of Syndicate agents. But in the chaos of battle, Philip found himself separated from the others, cut off and alone. He rounded a corner, coming face to face with a figure from his past. The man was older, his face lined and scarred, but Philip recognized him instantly. It was his former first officer, a man he had once trusted with his life. "Jameson?" Philip asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" The man smiled, a cold, cruel thing. "It's Phantom Overseer now, Captain, and I'm here to finish what we started all those years ago." Philip's grip tightened on his weapon, his mind racing. He had always known Jameson as a loyal, dedicated officer. But now, seeing him here, surrounded by the trappings of the Syndicate, he realized the truth. "You were one of them," Philip said, his voice shaking with anger. "You betrayed us, betrayed everything we stood for." The Overseer laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "No, Captain, I saw the truth. The UESC's mission was a fool's errand. The only way to ensure our survival is through strength, through power, and the Phantasm Syndicate will give us that power." Philip shook his head, his eyes blazing with fury. "You're wrong. The Syndicate is a cancer, a blight on the galaxy, and we're going to cut it out, root and stem." The two men stared each other down, the weight of centuries of history hanging between them, and then with a roar of rage they clashed, their weapons flashing in the dim light of the base. The battle was fierce, brutal. The Overseer was skilled, his movements lightning fast and precise. But Philip had the advantage of righteous anger, the knowledge that he was fighting for something greater than himself. With a final, desperate lunge, Philip struck the Overseer down, his blade finding the gap in the man's armor. The Overseer fell, his eyes wide with shock and pain. As he lay dying, the Overseer looked up at Philip, a bitter smile on his lips. "You think you've won, Captain? You have no idea what you're up against. The Syndicate is just the beginning. There are forces at work here beyond your comprehension." Philip knelt beside the fallen man, his voice low and steady. "Then we'll face them one by one. We'll fight until the galaxy is free of your corruption." The Overseer laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "You'll try, but in the end you'll fail, just like you failed to see the truth about your own mission." Philip's eyes narrowed, a cold dread settling in his gut. "What are you talking about, see?" The Overseer coughed, blood flecking his lips. "The UESC, they lied to you, Captain, about everything, your mission, your purpose. It was all a lie." Philip shook his head, refusing to believe. But as he looked into the Overseer's eyes, he saw the truth there, a dark and terrible knowledge. "What?" he began, his voice breaking. "What have we done?" The Overseer smiled, a final vicious triumph. "You'll find out soon enough, Captain, and when you do, you'll wish you had never woken up." With that, the Overseer breathed his last, leaving Philip alone with the weight of his words. The captain staggered to his feet, his heart pounding with the implications of what he had learned. He had to find the others, had to tell them what he had discovered. But as he made his way through the base, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all pawns in a much larger game, one whose rules they were only beginning to understand. Philip stared at the Overseer, his palms sweating from the revelation. The words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. "What do you mean Earth was on the brink of collapse? What catastrophic events?" The Overseer coughed, blood spattering his lips. "Natural disasters, war, famine. The planet was dying, and your precious UESC knew it. They sent you out here not to explore, but to find a new home, a place for humanity to start over." Philip shook his head, refusing to believe it. "No, that's not possible. They would have told us." "Would they?" the Overseer sneered. "Or would they have kept you in the dark, letting you believe in their noble lie while they planned for the worst?" Philip's grip tightened on his weapon, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to deny it, to cling to the ideals he had fought for all his life, but deep down, a part of him knew the Overseer was telling the truth. The two men circled each other, weapons raised. Philip's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with everything he had ever believed. "Even if what you say is true," he said, his voice shaking, "it doesn't justify what the Syndicate has done. The manipulation, the wars, the countless lives lost." The Overseer laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You still don't get it, do you? We're fighting for humanity's survival. Sometimes that means getting our hands dirty, making the hard choices that your UESC was too weak to make. With a roar of fury, Philip lunged forward, his blade clashing against the overseers. They fought with a desperate intensity, each driven by their own convictions. The room shook as an explosion ripped through the base. Rigel burst through the door, followed closely by the rest of Philip's team. They opened fire on the overseer, forcing him back. But the phantom overseer was not so easily defeated. He lashed out with a hidden blade, catching Philip across the chest. The captain stumbled, his blood staining the floor. Rigel rushed to Philip's side, dragging him to safety as the others kept the overseer at bay. The Vulcan's face was etched with worry as he applied pressure to the wound. The overseer, seeing his chance, made a break for the door, but he didn't get far. A blast from Philip's rifle caught him in the back, sending him sprawling to the ground. Philip staggered over, standing above the fallen overseer. The man looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of hatred and something else, something almost like respect. "You'll see," the overseer rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "In the end, you'll understand. You'll see that we were right." With a final shuddering breath, the phantom overseer died, his secrets dying with him. Philip stood over the body, his mind awash with doubts and questions. Back on Vulcan, Philip paced the halls of the High Council's chambers, his thoughts in turmoil. Rigel watched him with concern, the Vulcan's usually stoic face creased with worry. "We have to know the truth," Philip said finally, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "About Earth, about the mission, all of it." Rigel nodded. "I'll speak with the Council, see if they can grant us access to any old UESC records they might have." It took days of searching, of sifting through countless files and encrypted data caches. But finally they found it, a hidden trove of information buried deep within the UESC archives. And as Philip read the files, his heart sank. The overseer had been telling the truth. Earth was gone, destroyed by a cascading series of disasters that had left the planet uninhabitable. The mission, his mission, had been a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to save what remained of humanity. He slumped in his chair, the weight of the revelation crushing him. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, had been a lie. Rigel placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "What do we do now?" the Vulcan asked softly. Philip closed his eyes, the decision weighing heavily on his soul, to continue to fight for a lost cause, for an ideal that no longer existed, or to find a new purpose, a new reason to go on. He thought of his crew, of the bonds they had forged through battle and hardship. He thought of the Vulcans, of the alliance they had built, and he knew what he had to do. "We adapt," Philip said, his voice filled with a new perseverance. "We find a new way forward together, for all of us." As Philip pored over the recovered UESC data, his mind raced with the implications. Earth, the birthplace of humanity, reduced to a lifeless husk. The mission that had defined his entire existence revealed as a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to save what remained of his species. He clenched his fists, the weight of this knowledge threatening to crush him. Rigel placed a comforting hand on Philip's shoulder. "Captain, I know this is a lot to process, but we need you now more than ever." Philip looked up, his eyes hardening with willpower. "You're right, Rigel. We can't change the past, but we can fight for a better future, for all of us." Suddenly alarms blared throughout the Vulcan compound. Rigel rushed to a nearby console, his fingers flying over the controls. "By the gods! It's the Zorgons. They've launched a massive offensive against our homeworld." Philip sprang to his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins. "They must have learned about us, about the role we played in the last battle. They're coming to wipe us out, Vulcans and humans alike." The Vulcan High Council chamber devolved into chaos, voices raised in panic and despair. Philip's mind raced, analyzing the situation with the cold precision of a battle-hardened soldier. The Vulcans, for all their advanced technology, were no match for the sheer brutality and numbers of the Zorgon war machine. Not alone. He strode to the center of the room, his voice cutting through the din. "Listen to me. The only way we survive this is together, humans and Vulcans fighting side by side." The councillors fell silent, their eyes wide with shock and uncertainty. Philip pressed on, his words filled with a fierce conviction. "I propose an alliance. My crew and I will share our technology, our tactical knowledge, everything we brought with us from Earth. We'll integrate it with your own, forge weapons and defenses that can stand against the Zorgons." Rigel stepped forward, his voice ringing with support. "Captain Dixon is right. Alone we fall, but together we have a chance." The councillors murmured among themselves, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Finally the High Councillor stood, her eyes meeting Philip's. "The Vulcan people accept your proposal, Captain. May our alliance be the light that guides us through this darkest of hours." With no time to lose, Philip and his crew worked frantically alongside Vulcan scientists and engineers. They labored day and night, fusing human and Vulcan technology into a devastating arsenal. Pulse rifles hummed with newfound power, their bolts capable of piercing even the thickest Zorgon armor. Defensive shields shimmered with an iridescent glow, their matrices reinforced by Earthborn algorithms. As the Zorgon fleet descended upon Vulcan like a swarm of locusts, Philip stood on the front lines, Rigel at his side. The human captain gazed out at the sea of enemy ships, his grip tightening on his rifle. "This is it, old friend, the moment of truth." Rigel nodded, his eyes alight with a fierce commitment. "We stand together, Captain, to the end." The battle was joined, the skies above Vulcan erupting into a maelstrom of fire and destruction. Philip led the charge, his human crew and Vulcan allies fighting with a synergy born of desperation and shared purpose. They pushed back against the Zorgon tide, their enhanced weapons tearing through enemy ranks smoothly. But the Zorgons kept coming, wave after wave of soldiers pouring onto the planet's surface. Philip knew they needed a decisive blow, a way to cut the head off the snake. His gaze locked onto the massive Zorgon flagship, its hull overflowing with weapons. "Rigel," he shouted over the din of battle, "we need to take out their command ship. It's the only way to end this." Rigel's face was grim, but he nodded. "I'm with you, Captain, to the end." Together they fought their way to a Vulcan shuttle, dodging enemy fire and cutting down Zorgons with ruthless efficiency. They rocketed into the sky, weaving through the chaotic tapestry of the battle, their sights set on the flagship. Breaching the enemy ship's defenses, Philip and Rigel stormed the command deck, a whirlwind of blades and blaster bolts. They carved a path of destruction until at last they stood before the Zorgon Emperor himself. The Emperor was a towering figure, his armor adorned with the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds. He sneered at Philip, his eyes filled with malice. "You dare stand before me, human? You who are but a relic of a dead world?" Philip met the Emperor's gaze, unflinching. "I stand before you as a soldier, a defender of life. I offer you a choice, Emperor. Surrender and negotiate a truce, or face the full might of our combined forces." The Emperor hesitated, his eyes darting to the view screens where the tide of battle had turned against his fleet. Philip saw the realization dawn in those cruel eyes, the understanding that defeat was inevitable. "Very well, human," the Emperor spat, as if the words were poison on his tongue. "I will agree to your ceasefire, but mark my words, this is not over." As the Zorgon ships began to retreat and the guns fell silent, Philip felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The battle was won, but the war was not nearly finished. He turned to Rigel, a weary smile on his face. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us, my friend. Building a new future, forging peace out of the ashes of war." Rigel clasped Philip's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll do it together, Captain. Humans and Vulcans side by side, as it should be." As the smoke of battle began to clear and the first tentative negotiations began, Philip knew that the road ahead would be arduous and taxing. But for the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Hope for a galaxy where humans and Vulcans could stand as one, where the mistakes of the past could be learned from and a brighter tomorrow could be forged. He turned his gaze to the stars, to the infinite possibilities that stretched out before them. A strange new galaxy filled with dangers and wonders alike. And he knew, deep in his heart, that they would face it all together. As the dust settled from the Zorgon attack, Philip found himself in a room filled with an uneasy mix of humans, Vulcans, and Zorgons. The peace talks had begun, but tensions were high. Each faction eyed the others with suspicion, their hands never far from their weapons. Philip cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the room. "Before we begin, there's something you all need to know." He held up the data drive, the small device feeling heavy with the weight of its contents. Rigel stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "What is it, Philip?" "A message from the United Earth Space Command," Philip replied, his voice steady. "Recorded just before our mission launched." He inserted the drive into a nearby console, and a holographic image flickered to life. A man in a crisp UESC uniform appeared, his face lined with worry. "Captain Dixon, if you're seeing this, then our worst fears have been realized. Your mission was not just to find a new home for humanity, but also to locate an ancient alien artifact known as the Celestial Codex." A murmur rippled through the room, Vulcans and Zorgons alike leaning forward in interest. The hologram continued. "The Codex is said to hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe, granting immense power to whoever possesses it. But there were other factions on Earth, including the group that would become the Phantasm Syndicate, who sought the Codex for their own purposes. We fear they may have infiltrated your mission." Philip's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The Syndicate's actions, their influence on the Zorgons, it all made sense now. "We must find the Codex," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "And we must do it together. Humans, Vulcans, Zorgons. The fate of the stars may depend on our cooperation." The room erupted into chaos, shouts of protest and accusations flying. Philip raised his hands, his voice cutting through the din. "I know there is mistrust between us, centuries of bad blood. But if the Syndicate gets their hands on the Codex, none of that will matter. We must put aside our differences and work together." Rigel stepped forward, his eyes meeting Philip's. "The Vulcans will join you in this quest. Our knowledge and technology are at your disposal." The Zorgon Emperor, his armor still scored from the recent battle, nodded slowly. "The Zorgons will also lend their strength. But know this, human. If you betray us, there will be consequences." Philip met the Emperor's gaze unflinchingly. "Understood. We're in this together, for better or worse." As the meeting adjourned, Philip pulled Rigel aside. "I need you with me on this, old friend. Your wisdom and guidance will be invaluable." Rigel clasped Philip's shoulder, a rare smile on his face. "I would be honored, Captain. Let us see where this path leads us." They gathered a team of their best and brightest, human soldiers, Vulcan scientists, Zorgon warriors, an unlikely alliance forged in the fires of necessity. Their first lead took them to a desolate world on the fringes of known space, where ancient ruins hinted at the Codex's location. As they picked their way through the crumbling structures, Philip couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly an energy blast sizzled past his head, scorching the stone beside him. Syndicate agents poured from the shadows, weapons blazing. "Take cover," Philip shouted, diving behind a toppled pillar. Rigel and the others followed suit, returning fire. The battle was fierce, the ruins providing ample cover for both sides. Philip and his team fought with unbreakable spirit, their diverse skills and abilities complementing each other. As the last Syndicate agent fell, Philip knelt beside one of the bodies, his eyes widening in recognition. It was the Phantom Overseer's right-hand man, a cruel smile still etched on his lifeless face. "They knew we were coming," Philip said, his voice grim. "The Syndicate is always one step ahead of us." Rigel knelt beside him, examining a strange device clutched in the dead man's hand. "This is Vulcan technology, but modified in ways I've never seen before. The Syndicate has been busy." Philip's eyes sharp, a cold fury burning in his chest. "Then we'll just have to be smarter, faster, and stronger. The Codex is out there, and we're going to find it before they do." As they pressed on, the challenges grew more daunting, the clues more cryptic. Ancient riddles and treacherous terrain, hostile alien species and syndicate ambushes. Each obstacle tested their commitment and the fragile bonds of their alliance. But with each victory, each breakthrough, they grew closer, not just to the Codex, but to each other. Humans, Vulcans, and Zorgons, once bitter enemies, now fought side by side as comrades, as friends. Little did they know that the greatest test was yet to come, that the Phantasm Syndicate was closing in, ready to strike at the heart of their quest. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon, a battle that would decide the fate of not just their mission, but the entire galaxy. The ancient starship descended through the turbulent atmosphere of the long-forgotten planet, its hull shuddering as it pierced the thick, roiling clouds. Philip stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the monitor, as the ruins of a once great civilization came into view. Towering spires and sprawling complexes dotted the landscape, their once gleaming surfaces now dulled by the passage of time. Rigel, standing at Philip's side, studied the sensor readouts with a furrowed brow. The energy signatures are strongest in the central structure, a massive temple complex. If the Codex is anywhere, it's likely there. Philip nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his pulse rifle. Then that's where we're headed. Helm, bring us in for a landing near the temple. As the ship touched down, the rest of the team gathered in the cargo bay, a mix of human, Vulcan, and Zorgon warriors, each armed and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The ramp lowered with a hiss, and they stepped out onto the planet's surface, the air thick with the weight of millennia. They made their way through the ruins, picking their way past crumbling walls and toppled statues. Strange symbols and inscriptions covered every surface, their meanings lost to time. Rigel and the other scientists in the group pored over the markings, trying to decipher their secrets. As they approached the temple, a sense of unease settled over the group. The structure loomed before them, its walls pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Philip raised a hand, signaling for the others to halt. "I don't like this," he muttered, his eyes scanning the temple's facade. "It's too quiet, too still." Suddenly, a searing bolt of energy erupted from the temple's entrance, narrowly missing Philip's head. The team dove for cover as more blasts followed, the air crackling with the heat of the onslaught. "Here's the Syndicate," Rigel shouted, recognizing the distinctive whine of their weapons. "They must have beaten us here." Philip gritted his teeth, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Then we'll just have to beat them to the Codex, sir. Move out, stick to cover, and return fire." The team surged forward, their own weapons blazing as they pushed towards the temple entrance. The Syndicate agents fought back with desperate ferocity, their faces twisted with a zealous grit. At the entrance, Philip found himself face to face with a figure clad in the distinctive armor of a Syndicate overseer. The two clashed, their blades sparking as they met in a furious dance of steel and skill. Inside the temple, the battle raged on, the ancient halls echoing with the sounds of gunfire and the cries of the wounded. Rigel and the others raced towards the heart of the structure, following the pulsing energy signatures that grew stronger with every step. They burst into a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with pulsing conduits and glowing screens. In the center of the room, hovering in a beam of shimmering light, was a small, crystalline object, the Celestial Codex. Rigel approached the Codex, his eyes wide with wonder. He reached out to take it but hesitated, his hand hovering inches from its surface. The inscriptions on the walls, now glowing with a fierce intensity, seemed to whisper to him, revealing the true nature of the artifact. "By the gods," Rigel breathed, his voice trembling. "The Codex, and it's not just a source of power, it's a key to understanding the very fabric of the universe itself. The ancient ones who created it used it to transcend this plane of existence, to achieve a state of ultimate knowledge and enlightenment." But even as he spoke, the overseer burst into the chamber, his armor scorched and battered from his battle with Philip. He lunged for the Codex, his eyes wild with desperation. "The Codex is mine," he screamed, his voice ragged with madness. With its power, I will reshape the galaxy in the Syndicate's image. Philip, hot on the Overseer's heels, tackled him to the ground. They grappled, rolling across the chamber floor as each sought to gain the upper hand. Rigel, torn between the lure of the Codex and the chaos of the battle, made a split-second decision. He lunged forward, his fingers closing around the Codex's crystalline surface. As he touched it, a blinding light filled the chamber, engulfing Rigel and the others. He felt a rush of energy, a surge of knowledge and understanding that threatened to overwhelm his senses. In that moment, suspended in the heart of the Codex's power, Rigel saw the true nature of the trials that the ancients had left behind. They were not merely tests of strength or skill, but challenges of character, of the very essence of one's being. He saw Philip and the Overseer, locked in their struggle, each driven by their own convictions and desires, and he saw the others, human and Vulcan and Zorgan alike, each grappling with their own fears and doubts, their own dreams and ambitions. In that instant of perfect clarity, Rigel understood what he had to do. He emerged from the light, the Codex clutched in his hand. Philip and the Overseer, startled by his sudden appearance, paused in their battle, their eyes locked on the glowing artifact. Rigel held up the Codex, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "The trials are not yet over," he declared. "The ancients left them for a reason, to ensure that only the truly worthy could claim the Codex's power." He turned to Philip, his eyes meeting his friend's. "We must face these trials, Philip, not just you and I, but all of us. Human, Vulcan, Zorgon, even the Syndicate. Only by confronting our deepest selves can we hope to prove our worth." Philip, understanding dawning in his eyes, nodded slowly. He turned to the Overseer, his stance no longer one of aggression, but of commitment. "Rigel is right," he said, his voice steady. "We all have a stake in this, whether we like it or not. The trials will determine who among us is fit to decide the fate of the Codex, and with it the fate of the galactic realm." The Overseer, his face twisted with conflicting emotions, hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a curt nod, he lowered his weapon. "Very well," he growled. "We will face these trials, and let the ancients judge our worth." As they made their way deeper into the temple, guided by the pulsing light of the Codex, each member of the group steeled themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. They knew that the trials would test them in ways they had never been tested before, that they would be forced to confront the very essence of their beings. But they also knew that the stakes had never been higher, that the future of the cosmos itself hung in the balance. And so, with a shared sense of purpose and grit, they pressed on, ready to face whatever the ancients had in store for them. Philip strode forward, his pulse rifle raised and aimed squarely at the celestial Codex. His finger tightened on the trigger, ready to destroy the artifact and end its threat to the galaxy. But just as he was about to fire, a hand gripped his arm, yanking the rifle off target. Philip whirled around, coming face to face with Rigel. The Vulcan's eyes were wide, his expression a mix of desperation and guilt. "I can't let you do that, Philip," Rigel said, his voice strained. "The Codex, it's too important." Philip stared at his friend. Confusion and betrayal etched on his face. "What are you talking about, Rigel? We agreed. The Codex is too dangerous. It needs to be destroyed." Rigel shook his head, his grip on Philip's arm tightening. "No, you don't understand. I haven't been entirely truthful with you, Philip, about who I am and why I'm really here." A cold dread settled in Philip's gut as Rigel continued, the words spilling out in a rush. "I'm not just a Vulcan archaeologist. I'm an agent of the Phantasm Syndicate, have been for years. They planted me in the Vulcan military, tasked me with monitoring the galaxy for any signs of the Codex's resurgence." Philip took a step back, his mind turning. You've been working for them this whole time? Everything, our friendship, the battles we fought together, it was all a lie?" Rigel's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. "No, Philip, please, my loyalty to you, our friendship, that was real. But my mission, my duty to the Syndicate, I couldn't ignore that. When you and your crew awakened, I saw an opportunity. a chance to finally locate the Codex to complete my mission. The Overseer, seeing Rigel's distraction, lunged forward, snatching the Codex from its pedestal. He held it aloft, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "At last," he crowed, "the power of the ancients is mine." He began to chant in a strange, guttural language, the Codex glowing brighter with each word. But as the chant reached a crescendo, the Codex suddenly pulsed, a wave of energy knocking the Overseer back. The artifact rose into the air, hovering of its own accord. A voice, ancient and powerful, echoed through the chamber. "Foolish mortal," it boomed, "you seek power, but you do not understand. The Codex is not a weapon, not a tool for domination. It is a beacon, a signal to our kind that our successors have proven themselves worthy." The temple began to shake, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. A blinding light engulfed the room, and suddenly they were no longer alone. Figures of pure energy, vaguely humanoid in shape, materialized around them. The ancients, the creators of the Codex, had returned. "You have passed the trials," the voice said, "and proven yourselves worthy. We offer you a choice, a chance to join us in the higher plane of existence, to leave behind your physical forms and ascend to a new level of being." The Overseer, his face twisted with rage and madness, stepped forward. "I accept," he snarled. "I will take the power you offer and use it to rule this galaxy." But as he moved to join the ancients, his form began to flicker and fade. He screamed, his voice echoing with agony and fury, until he vanished entirely, leaving behind only a faint wisp of energy. Philip and Rigel, still reeling from the revelation of Rigel's true identity, looked at each other, then at the ancients. "And what of you?" the voice asked. "Will you join us or remain to shape the future of your galaxy?" Philip hesitated, torn. The offer was tempting, a chance to leave behind the pain and struggles of the physical world. But as he looked at Rigel, he knew he couldn't abandon his friend or the alliance they had worked so hard to build. "I choose to stay," Philip said, his voice steady. "There's still work to be done here, still a future to fight for." Rigel, tears streaming down his face, nodded. "I stay as well. I have much to atone for, and I can't do that if I leave now." The ancients seemed to nod, their forms beginning to fade. "So be it," the voice said. "Know that you have earned our respect and our blessing. May your future be bright and your bonds strong." With a final pulse of light, the ancients vanished, and the temple began to crumble in earnest. Philip and Rigel raced for the exit, dodging falling stones and collapsing pillars. They burst out into the open air, just as the temple collapsed entirely, burying the Codex and the secrets of the ancients beneath tons of rubble and dust. In the aftermath, as the dust settled, Philip and Rigel sat side by side, exhausted and battered, but alive. "I'm sorry," Rigel said, his voice hoarse, "for everything. The lies, the betrayal. Said I never wanted to hurt you, Philip. You're my friend, the best friend I've ever had." Philip was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally he spoke. "I won't lie, Rigel. It hurts knowing that you were working for the Syndicate all this time, but I also know that in the end, when it mattered most, you chose to stand with me, with us." He turned to face Rigel, his eyes intense. "It won't be easy rebuilding the trust between us, but I'm willing to try if you are." Rigel nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I am, Philip. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again, to make things right." Together they stood, ready to face the challenges ahead. They knew that the scars of the past would take time to heal, that the alliance between humans, Vulcans, and Zorgans was still fragile. But they also knew that they had each other, and the bonds of friendship and shared experience that had been forged through the trials and triumphs of their journey. As they made their way back to their ship, Philip couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The galaxy was still a vast and mysterious place, filled with dangers and wonders alike. But with Rigel at his side, and the lessons they had learned, he knew that they were ready to face whatever the future might bring. The journey back to Vulcan was a somber one, the weight of recent events hanging heavy in the air. Philip and Rigel, still grappling with the revelations and emotions of their confrontation, spent much of the trip in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. But as they approached the Vulcan homeworld, Philip knew that they couldn't afford to dwell on the past. The alliance between humans, Vulcans and Zorgons was still in its infancy, and it would take all of their efforts to nurture it into something lasting and strong. As they landed, they were greeted by a delegation of all three races, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. Philip stepped forward, his voice ringing with conviction. "We have faced many challenges," he said, "and we have not always seen eye to eye. But the trials we have endured have shown us the strength that lies in unity, in setting aside our differences and working towards a common goal." He gestured to Rigel, who stood at his side, head bowed. "We have all made mistakes, all faced difficult choices, but what matters now is how we move forward, how we learn from those mistakes and build a better future together." There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd, nods of approval from Vulcan and Zorgon alike. Philip felt a swell of pride, seeing the seeds of cooperation and understanding taking root. In the weeks and months that followed, Philip and Rigel worked tirelessly to strengthen the bonds between their peoples. They organized joint training exercises, cultural exchange programs, even cooperative scientific endeavors. It wasn't always easy. Old prejudices and suspicions died hard, and there were times when it seemed that the fragile peace they had built would shatter. But through it all, Philip and Rigel remained steadfast, their friendship a shining example of what could be achieved when individuals looked beyond their differences. Years passed, and the alliance grew and prospered. Philip, his hair now grey and his face lined with the wisdom of age, watched as a new generation of humans, Vulcans, and Zorgons took up the mantle of exploration and discovery. They were a brave and curious lot, these young ones. They looked to the stars not with fear but with wonder, eager to uncover the secrets and marvels that the galaxy held. And as Philip watched them embark on their own journeys, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. They were the future, the legacy of all that he and Rigel, and all those who had come before, had fought and sacrificed for. He thought back to that fateful day, when he had first awoken from cryo sleep to find Rigel staring at him through the pod window. How far they had come since then, how much they had learned and grown. The galaxy was still a vast and unpredictable place, filled with dangers and challenges at every turn. But Philip knew that as long as there were those willing to stand together, to face the unknown with courage and compassion, then there would always be hope. And so, as he watched the stars wheel overhead, he smiled, content in the knowledge that the future was in good hands and that the legacy of his journey would endure, a beacon of light in the vast and endless reaches of space. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.